Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zeng here, and today I'm excited to show you guys my introduction to VGC 2016 guide. I created this video really to help out those that might be completely new to the VGC format, as well as those who are interested in playing 2016 but don't really have a good starting point / foundation. So if you're a player that's already been playing since the first day, you know this information might not be as helpful, but a couple of topics that I discuss in this video include the top megas, the top non-megas, the top legendaries, and then other things like strategies that you'll often see, some of the top teams that are currently doing well / strategies, a bunch of really helpful resources, a discussion on the weather mechanics, and comparing VGC 2016 to other years. So even though this guide is really meant for those that might be a little bit newer to VGC, I think everyone will be able to find something helpful in this video, and I sure hope so. And for those that are looking for that more in-depth analysis, do not worry, the future videos after this really will be covering each section I talk about further and further more in depth, because I just wanted to get a good foundation off before anything else, just so people would have a generic thing to refer to, especially those that are newer to the game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please leave a like and show your support by giving me any feedback or comments, and share with any of your friends who might be interested in playing Pokemon VGC 2016. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into it. So to quickly rehash, VGC stands for the Video Game Championships, and it's the official rule set that the Pokemon Company International uses. So if you're interested in becoming a real-life Pokemon master and going to tournaments and eventually qualifying for the World Championships and competing there, you will have to learn how to play this rule set and really master it. It's double battles and flat battle. You end up bringing 6 Pokemon, but you only choose 4 in team preview, so it's very important that you have a full team of 6, but you have 4 that can adapt to any team you face against. You are tethered to 90 seconds for team preview, 45 seconds per turn, and 15 minutes per game. Now this is for major tournaments. It might be a little bit different at local events, especially at Pokemon Showdown. Of course, the time limits work a little bit differently there, but in general, this is what you should be practicing for, because at the end of the day, that's the most important. Now you are allowed up to 2 restricted legendaries, so if you've played VGC 2015 at all, this is a little bit different because now you are allowed these legendaries, but for those that have played 2015, think about it this way, like it's literally the same format, but now 15 new Pokemon are allowed. But the Pentagon rule still is in effect, so your Pokemon must be caught or bred in X, Y, or Oris, and it's similar to VGC 2010 in terms of rule set, because back then, legendaries were allowed as well. But, given that we're comparing it to 2010, I want to talk about why 2016 is a very unique format and a very different format from anything we've really ever played. First of all, it's an incredibly fast-paced format, if not the fastest format we've really ever had. Games go really quickly, and you really have to consider each switch you make and each attack that you make, and one over prediction can really cost you the game. For those that have watched my first 2 episodes of Showdown Throwdown, we really demonstrated how this is really the case. And now your games typically center around your restricted legendaries and primals as well, and of course every year you have a main strategy with your team and you have a main core, right? But this year is especially unique because now you want to bring your legendaries and primals almost to all your games, since you only are given 2. Chances are you're going to choose 2 that can be brought to any game. So as a result, you're going to want to support that with a really good supporting cast, and there are actually a ton of non-legendary / mega Pokemon that are now viable. I'll be going into that a little bit further on, but it's actually pretty cool that a lot of Pokemon that previously haven't been used in VGC are now having a huge impact on the scene. In terms of differences from 2010 for those that have played, Team Preview now exists, whereas it didn't exist back then. Items now can't be switched around, they are locked to each Pokemon, whereas back then you could have your Lomon Groudon in a best of 3 in Game 1 and put it on Rayquaza in Game 2. You can now only have 2 restricted Pokemon as opposed to 4, so that makes team building a little bit more one-dimensional, but still really fun. And introduction of Megas and Primals also basically changes strategies up. With the Primals being introduced, it's kind of a big deal. Of course, there are only 2, Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon, but each team really has at least one of those, and you'll see more about that later as we talk about team compositions. But before we jump into it, I also want to give you guys the rundown on weather mechanics, because this is really important. Given that Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon are so prominent in the scene, you really have to learn how these weather mechanics work, because it's integral to beating those Pokemon. So for those that don't know, of course, Primal Kyogre, Primal Groudon, and Mega Rayquaza each get a special ability. Kyogre extends the rain and it makes it a lot more difficult to beat, similar with Groudon and the sun, and Rayquaza has a new ability which really isn't actually weather, like it doesn't have any effects other than reducing the super effectiveness on flying types, but it does cancel out the Primal's abilities. So yeah, this is really important, right? And in addition to that, with the C ability like Kyogre has, fire type attacks don't have any effect. Conversely, with Desolate Land, water type attacks don't have any effect when it's up, so you have to really consider, you know, switching in at the right time. So for example, if you switch your Primal Kyogre in when your opponent has Primal Groudon out, then you'll get the rain up, and suddenly their fire type attacks won't have any effect, and that's huge in terms of conserving and super effective type attacks. So they also can't be cancelled by normal weather, so that's why Pokemon like Politoed, Tyranitar, Abomasnow, Charizard Y really aren't viable at all. I mean, you might be able to use them offensively to take advantage of the rain or the sun, but they're really not that good anymore, unfortunately. So the only ways you can stop these weathers is within opposing weather, one of these advanced weathers I like to call it, or through Cloud9 and Airlock. So normal Rayquaza actually shuts it down. Other Pokemon with Cloud9, for example, Golduck or Psyduck can actually shut it down. Some people have been using those, which is kind of interesting, but those are really your two main answers to it. It still operates based on speed, so if I lead with my Primal Kyogre and my opponent leads with my Primal Groudon and my Kyogre outspeeds the Groudon, then Groudon will have the advantage and the sun will be up, and suddenly that forces Kyogre to basically switch out. So you really have to consider that when you're building your team. It also leaves the field when the Pokemon switches or is KO'd, so if your Primal Kyogre goes down, then the Heavy Rain actually just goes away, as opposed to Politoed's Drizzle, which sticks around for really the entirety of the match until it's shut down by something else. So yeah, or it's not the entirety nowadays, it's 5 turns, but basically that's how the weather mechanics work, and it's really important that you understand this because Primal / Mega Rayquaza will be really running around everywhere. So now I'm going to get into the Pokemon that are used, or the Pokemon that are banned. So this is the list of banned legendaries. Don't really want to dwell too much about it, but the reason why they're banned is because they're typically hard to get in-game. It's not because they're overpowered. And, you know, a couple of notable ones are like Jirachi, Darkrai, and Arceus, which you might have used if you've played other doubles formats or Uber formats, for example, that Smogon has. But yep, these are all banned. You cannot use them, so don't even think about them. There's no point in looking at what they can have and what they can do, because you're not going to be facing any. However, there are 15 new legendaries, as I mentioned, and these are called typically restricted legendaries. So you see the full list of 15 here, and later on I'll be breaking down into which ones are really good, which ones are maybe underrated / haven't seen much use, and which ones you maybe just don't even want to try out because they're not very good. So do remember that you get 2 out of these 15, but it's a little bit more than 15 because of course you have Groudon and Primal Groudon, Kyogre and Primal Kyogre, and then the different Kyurem forms. So yeah. Now let's jump into a general team composition. So this is a very basic skeleton, but typically you have the choice of your Primal, so of course that's just going to be Primal Groudon or Kyogre. I will have a future video on detailing both of those and which one you really want to consider, but they're both very, very strong options. You know, Groudon seems to be the more popular one right now, and I do think both are very good depending on your team build and really your playstyle. And then you get your choice of your second restricted legendary. Some players actually opt for both Primals, which certainly works. You know, it does take up both of your slots, but it, you know, is really, really strong, and it makes each game a little bit more interesting since you have both weathers under your hand, but of course you have all the other options as well. And then after that, you choose your Mega Evolution. So Mega Legendaries like Rayquaza and Mewtwo do count for a Legendary, so keep that in mind. It's one of the major reasons why, even though Mega Rayquaza was really hyped up by a lot of players who aren't as familiar with VGC, you know, a lot of the players who have played VGC for a long time realize that the fact it takes up a Legendary and a Mega Evolution slot really restricts your team building, and as a result, you know, you really have to be careful. Also because of the fact that Rayquaza is really frail for a Mega as opposed to Pokemon like Kangaskhan, which are typically actually a little bit bulkier. So even though it's really, really strong offensively, you do have to consider that. Some players actually like to opt for 2 Mega Evolutions, so it's not rare to see, you know, team compositions with both Kangaskhan and Salamence. And then finally, to round things up, you typically have around 2 to 3 supporting Pokemon, sometimes even 4 depending on your choice of Primals and Legendaries and Mega Evolutions and the intersection really between all those previous 3. So, in terms of restricted legendaries, earlier I showed you guys the full list of 15. Right now, if you're playing VGC 2016, and really probably for the remainder of the format, of course this is early metagame, so a lot of this will probably change as the year develops, but I can promise you guys that at least this point will stay the same. You can expect Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, Xerneas, and Mega Rayquaza. If you go to a tournament, if you play in matches, you are going to see a combination of those 4. Most players actually right now currently like to opt for 2 out of those 4, so definitely look out for those. Other top ones that I've seen right now, Yveltal and Dialga are the ones, or Yveltal I should say, and Dialga are the 2 that stick out the most, but I've also seen Giratina O, Lugia, Ho-Oh, and White Kyurem. Other potential viable ones that I haven't seen people really use, but I definitely can see it fitting onto a team are Mewtwo in its Mega forms, Giratina, Palkia, and then normal Rayquaza, Kyogre, and Groudon. Of course, you know, the primals are stronger, but you can use them, you can bluff them in Team Preview actually, which could be a little bit interesting. You can put a Choice Scarf on one of them, so you get really fast Water Spout or Eruptions off, etc. And the least common of the bench, and probably the weakest I'd say, are Zekrom, Reshiram, Zygarde, Black Kyurem, and Kyurem. These really just don't click, they have very many options, especially when compared to the stronger legendaries, and you can certainly try them out. I'm not saying you should count them out, but at the same time, you definitely want to prepare for the first two tiers, whereas the last two, you know, are a little bit more interesting, especially this last one. Probably not going to help you very much in terms of winning battles, but I'm not saying you should count them out, and I probably will experiment with them at least to see where they can at least fit in the format in terms of niche roles. So, onto Mega Evolutions. Right now, you see I have split it into two columns. You've got your top tier and you've got your has potential. So top tier is Kangaskhan, Mawile, Salamence, Rayquaza, and Gengar. I'd say the first four. Gengar isn't seen as much, but it has seen some success already. But the other four are really, really major, and they are having a profound impact. They're doing excellently right now. Obviously, you don't see Pokemon like Charizard or Gardevoir. Charizard's really just useless, unfortunately, because of how weather works. Gardevoir is just a little bit frail now, and you have Xerneas as a Pokemon that can also get that, you know, stab fairy type attacking. The others that might have a little bit potential are Metagross, Lopunny, Swampert, Mewtwo X and Y, and Venusaur, but really the first half is what you're going to be seeing, like I would say 95% of battles, and you might run into a niche kind of Mega Evolution here and then. I think these are obviously just a couple of them. There are obviously a lot that I haven't mentioned that certainly could work, and for example, Sejong Park won the World Championships with Gyarados in 2014, and you know, not many people really used it back then, but in terms of 2016 and Mega Evolutions, it really feels like the first five are ones that most people are going to be using to win, including myself. So I'm not saying you shouldn't try out the others, but I'm saying if you're preparing for VGC 2016, expect the first five for sure. But yeah, you know, it really depends on what team you're using and kind of what strategy you have around it. So definitely keep the second tier in mind and keep all the others that I haven't mentioned in mind as well, because you could certainly make them work. So let's talk about the top non-restricted Pokemon. So this first list of 12 I've put out here are probably the top 12. I don't want to say the top 12, but they are probably 12 of the most common Pokemon you'll run into right now. And there's a list later on. The next 12 are also ones that people have been using, but these 12 you must prepare for. You absolutely must, because the majority of teams you will probably see two, maybe if not three of these. So you've got Aegislash, Amoonguss, Cresselia, Crobat, Ferrothorn, Gengar, Liepard, Landorus, T, Smeargle, Talonflame, Thundurus, and Togekiss. Now I plan on doing two videos, one just to talk about each more of these in depth, and then I'm going to do individual analyses for each one as well eventually. But you know, currently just know what these Pokemon do, know their typing. I mean, most of it is pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of figure out what they do. They either help set up the team or are used for offense, or, you know, rely on things like Prankster, for example, in Thundurus or Liepard's case. So these are Pokemon you must watch out for. They all help the team by supporting in one way or another, and you might want to do some research onto that. This next list of Pokemon are ones that probably aren't as common, but are still really powerful and have done, you know, well, or people are just using it. You obviously have a bunch of really interesting ones here, like Golduck, which, as I mentioned earlier, cancels out the Primal's weathers. And then you see Pokemon like Scizor make a reappearance here, and Scizor as a Steel type is quite solid. Infernape was actually used back in 2010 to pretty good success, and I have seen some people use it. And then you got a bunch of other interesting ones. I think Ditto definitely sticks out as an interesting one because of the fact that it can instantly transform and take the Xerneas' stat boost, and since Xerneas is so common, you have to prepare for it, and Ditto's a pretty cool answer to it, honestly. But yeah, here are another 12 that you should look out for and you might want to consider on your team when you're looking for answers. These all have a little bit different functions and roles, but all of them are quite viable options. Obviously, that was only 24 though, so there's still a lot more that I haven't mentioned, but these are the ones that seem like the most common. I wanted to give you guys a couple of sample team compositions, and these don't come with full EV spreads or information, but just to show you how teams are typically built nowadays in the format. So, you know, for example, in the first one, you've got Groudon, Xerneas, Kangaskhan, Ditto, Smeargle, and Talonflame, so 2 normal legendaries, 1 primal, and then Kangaskhan. In the second case, you've got Groudon, Yveltal, Mawile, Liepard, Togekiss, and Crobat. This is Marcus Stadter's team. You know, he chose Yveltal and Mawile as his choices, and then you have your standard supporting cast of Liepard, Togekiss, and Crobat. The third one is Groudon, Rayquaza, Mawile, Landorus, T, Cresselia, and Greninja. So this one's a little bit interesting, right? Because you have 2 potential Megas in Rayquaza and Mawile, but you could also just bring both Rayquaza and Mawile into your match and not Mega Evolve Rayquaza. So another example of ways you could work things around. This next one actually has a supporting cast of 4 normal Pokemon in Thundurus, Landorus, Amoonguss, and Talonflame, but you've got Primal, Kyogre, and Mega Rayquaza. So, you know, unlike the previous team, which kind of wanted a second Mega option, this one just opts for 2 Legendaries and 4 normal Pokemon that have been very successful in the past. And this final one is that dual Primal that we talked about. It's got Kyogre, Groudon, Kangaskhan, Cresselia, Amoonguss, and Smeargle. So you see that the second kind of half really shows that there are a bunch of different Pokemon that people have been using. And yeah, I mean, there are similarities between those for sure, but you see unique picks like Greninja, like Liepard, etc. Smeargle is definitely an annoying one that you absolutely must prepare for, which I'll cover a little bit further in when we talk about strategies that you'll run into. So here are a couple of really great resources that I highly recommend. The first one is 3DS Pokemon GL's Generation Showdown statistics, and these will all be in the description below as well, but I point to this is because it's a Wi-Fi tournament that Pokemon GL actually had, and it wasn't the exact same rule set as 2016 because there were a couple of notable differences, but it gave players a pretty good sense of what was popular / what was not. So you can actually go on that link and you can search the top Pokemon and see what was really popular, see what the movesets and the EV, or not the EV spreads, or I should say the natures and the items on those Pokemon were. In addition, if you're interested in seeing the top teams on Showdown updated weekly, there are 2 lists that I have from 2 notable players. Zach has compiled the top 25, and Nick has compiled the top 50. Zach's, I think, is a little bit easier to follow along, but Nick also obviously has double the amount of teams. So both of those are pretty interesting to look at what's dominating the Showdown metagame. Obviously, not going to be entirely resemblant of the actual metagame in real-life tournaments, but a decent sense, especially since it's the best place for practice right now. And for those that are wanting to practice, you know, Showdown, as I mentioned, is the best place. The next one is a Japanese resource called Esports Runner. They've got a Twitter at ESR_VGC, and they also have a website. Their website actually covers almost all Japanese tournaments, including grassroots tournaments, so you'll get a lot of information. They just had a grassroots tournament in which I think 79 players participated, and you can get the team compilations and the best teams, best performing teams, and the most common Pokemon. So just follow that link. It is in Japanese, so you have to do a little bit digging around, but also check out the Twitter. They typically link out to everything. Earlier I mentioned Marcus Thatter. He does have a YouTube channel, 13Yoshi37. He's probably making the best 2016 content right now, and I'm trying to, you know, really get up to his level and match him. But he's been putting a lot of great content out, especially Wi-Fi content. So if you're interested in any of that at all, I highly recommend it. One of my good friends, an amazing player, won 2 European national championships, and an outstanding guy in general. So check him out. I full-heartedly support him, and I'm looking forward to working with him in the future. Finally, the Pokemon Company International has a bunch of online articles at pokemon.com/strategy. Not too many people actually know about this, but they have a lot of amazing guides and resources. You know, they posted the top teams at US Nationals and Worlds last year, up to movesets and items. This year, they've already created a guide really covering all the 15 legendaries that are allowed, their strengths, their weaknesses, what you should expect from them. So if you want further information on the legendaries I talked about earlier, definitely check that out. As I mentioned, I will be doing more in-depth analysis and guides on those, but this is just for you guys to get a basic understanding of what's good and what's not good right now. A couple of more resources, these are all on Nugget Bridge, and Nugget Bridge is also a place you should probably have bookmarked for VGC information because it's where all of us go. If you want some sample teams to try out, including EV spreads like their in Showdown form, go to the link that I have on the first one. This one's sample teams that a bunch of Japanese players use in the Generational Showdown. The second one is a speed tier list that you'll want to have handy when you're building your teams, and I'll allude to this later when I talk about my team building, or when I go into my team building guide. You'll be able to see how to use this list really to its full potential, but it's a really good resource just to have. The final one is for those that are interested in actually getting these Pokemon in game. There's an excellent guide to soft resetting, to catching your perfect flawless legendaries in game and not spending too much time on it. So Nugget Bridge, check out all these links, very, very helpful. So a couple of common strategies, or these are basically all the strategies I think you'll run into for the most part. Obviously, we've talked about weather in Primal, Kyogre, and Groudon. You've got your heavy offense, so just spread attacks and really strong attacks like Eruption, Water Spout, Dragon Ascent, a Dazzling Gleam, which I didn't write, or Hyper Voice. Like, these are all really, really powerful and can instantly pick up 2-hit KOs, especially in combination. You know, they can just knock you out, so you have to watch out for that. Make sure you have your ways to prevent it. Skill swap / roleplay on Pokemon like Cresselia and Thundurus paired up with Primals is really interesting because you can actually revert the weather. So one way to win the weather war, for example, with a Cresselia and a Kyogre, even if the sun is up, if Cresselia sets up Trick Room and goes for a skill swap, then the rain actually goes back onto the field. Similarly, Thundurus and other Pokemon with access to roleplay can actually roleplay the Primal weather and copy it to make that the weather, and so you can turn the weather war back into your favor. As I mentioned, Xerneas is probably the top non-primal / non-mega legendary to look out for. It's going to be the most common probably for the whole year, honestly, and even if not, like, it's still going to be a top one, and that's because of its access to Geomancy and a power herb. So definitely watch out for that. You need to make sure your team has ways to stop Xerneas. Tailwind and Trick Room, like always. Tailwind seems stronger than ever this year because of how quick the format is, so watch out for Pokemon like Crobat and Talonflame. Those Pokemon will always be looking to set up Tailwind. And then you got Trick Room with Pokemon like Cresselia and Dialga, and Trick Room did win the 2010 World Championships on Ray Rizzo's team, was one of the most prominent strategies. I used it at both regionals and nationals where I got top 4 and 17th at, and I had a Dialga team there that was meant to set up Trick Room and sweep, so definitely look out for that still. A Prankster is really maybe better than ever with Pokemon like Whimsicott, Thundurus, and Liepard really running everywhere. Smeargle's Dark Void, as I mentioned earlier, and then Redirection from Pokemon like Amoonguss, Togekiss, and Clefairy. So that's basically a rundown, a good summary, I would say, of the format as of right now. Like I mentioned, I didn't go into in-depth analysis in terms of VV spreads information, but the links that I provided will be able to provide you with some of the knowledge that you're looking for. In addition, I'll be going into guides for each section I talked about in this video later on, so don't worry about that. So now what, right? First of all, I recommend that you just build teams and practice on Pokemon Showdown because we do not have an in-game ladder right now, but I still think it's good to get your teams in-game and battle others just because in-game practice is always fun and it's always great. And if VGC is something that definitely compels you and you actually want to maybe make it to the National or World Championships, you can start your path to the 2016 World Championships. I've included the link on Play Pokemon. You really have to do a little bit of digging around, but there are local events called Premier Challenges year-round. Regionals in the US are coming up in February and May, and then you've got nationals in May to July. So if you're interested in qualifying for Worlds, this year is actually easier than ever. So if events are accessible to you, you should highly consider it because it's a ton of fun. Going to these events in general is always a blast, and I really love it. Obviously, you have to put time and resources into it, but it's definitely worth it even if you don't end up winning at all. So yeah. That basically covers it up for this guide. Coming soon to this channel, in-depth analysis on all the topics I've covered previously, so I'm going to break each section down into its own video for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, while this whole video was that long, really, to talk about each one, talk about each supporting Pokemon, what each Pokemon can really do in the format. But like I mentioned, the resources I've shown in this video will be able to at least provide some basic information. If you have no idea what the heck Xerneas or Groudon O or Giratina O does, like, you can follow the links and you can get some generic information, but I'll have my own guides on that soon as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry that it was really kind of all over the place, but I hope you found it helpful, especially if you're new to VGC, and like I mentioned, there will be more good stuff coming in the future. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Leave a like if you did, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a happy holiday season and a new year, actually, as it is almost New Year's, and get excited for a good VGC 2016 season. Alright, peace guys.